Well, good morning and welcome to today's news conference looking at the condition and also the traffic safety on Florida's system of rural highways. The report itself is based on data that we collected from the Florida Department of Transportation, including several high-resolution maps of the state that really illustrate some of the issues that we're going to discuss today. I'm joined by Colton Medill. Colton is the Director of Economic Development, Innovation, and Infrastructure Policy at the Florida Chamber of Commerce, and we appreciate him appearing today. After I give my comments, we'll hear from Colton, and then for any questions that you may have, at that point, if you using the raise chat function or message function, let us know that you have a question. My colleague Carolyn Kelly will then elevate you to the panel and you can ask your questions or any follow-up questions of myself or Colton. TRIP as an organization over the last 50 years has released over 600 reports looking at the condition nationally and also at the state level of the transportation system, including the conditions of roads and bridges, levels of traffic congestion, the level of traffic safety on the system, and the importance of that system to our economy. TRIP as an organization is supported by a coalition of manufacturing, insurance, construction, labor, and engineering organizations, and they look to TRIP to put out the latest information on our transportation system. The report today looks specifically at the state's most critical rural roadways, and these are essentially two-lane rural roadways that support the interstate system in providing additional mobility throughout Florida's rural communities. But really, those roads are also critical for connecting the rural communities to the state's largest urban areas and really ultimately to the entire nation's economy through our transportation system. The report points out that Florida is one of the fastest growing states in the country, with the population reaching over 23 million, a 46% increase since 2000. And by 2050, it's anticipated that Florida's population will increase by another 22%. The report notes that 32 of Florida's 67 counties are considered rural counties and are home to over 1 million people and support nearly 500,000 jobs, generating $33 billion in annual economic output. Florida's rural areas traditionally have had very strong agricultural facility, farms and other important parts of the economy, but increasingly is also broadening their economy beyond agricultural to other high wage areas, including manufacturing, logistics, health services, tourism, and increasingly agribusinesses that transform agricultural products into finished goods. These economic sectors share a tremendous need to have a reliable and well-maintained transportation system to support their success economically. But as the report points out, Florida's rural transportation system has significant challenges. It lacks adequate capacity in some corridors to support growing freight and also passenger vehicle travel. It does not provide the needed level of connectivity between urban and rural portions of Florida. In many cases, it lacks adequate roadway safety features, which are critical to keep people on rural roadways as safe as possible. And they're carrying, in many cases, a higher share of large trucks than we see on all other roadways across the state. The report notes that based on data from the Florida Department of Transportation, that nearly a third of the state's major two-lane rural roads are carrying more than 8,500 vehicles a day, a significant level of travel for a two-lane roadway to carry. In fact, when the Florida Department of Transportation looked into the future, what we found in the TRIP report is that by 2045, the actual miles of roadways, the report found that by 2045, that the miles of rural highways in Florida that will be congested is anticipated to increase by 73%. Currently, 433 miles, or about a quarter, of rural two-lane roadways are currently considered congested, but by 2045, it's anticipated that 750 miles, 40% of those rural roadways will be congested. This is anticipating the current configuration of these roadways. Certainly, if the state has the resources to expand the capacity of some of these roadways, we could see a significantly better outcome. But based on the current system, these critical rural roadways are likely to become more congested. The report also noted that in terms of the roadways and the rural communities, we're seeing that many of these roadways are carrying a significant level of large truck travel because of the critical importance of the rural communities to have that level of freight movement. In fact, over 1,400 miles of these rural roadways, which is well over half of them, are carrying at least 15% of the vehicles on those rural roadways are large trucks. In the report itself, there are high-resolution maps that show the current roadways in terms of rural roadways, in terms of which ones are most congested, but then it also turns around and takes a look into the future in terms of how much worse congestion will be on those roadways. And it also illustrates which of the roadways are carrying the heaviest share of large truck travel. We also anticipate in Florida a significant increase in the amount of freight being moved throughout the state. In fact, by 2050, it's estimated that the value of these goods, adjusted for inflation, will nearly double. And by weight, we'll see a 50% increase in freight. And so while I'm sure as people drive throughout the state and on the rural roads, they see a large share of large trucks. The reality is we're going to be seeing more trucks on the roads. And it's critical that these roadways be improved further so that they can move freight, but do it safely and also reliably. We took a look at traffic fatality rates, which are measured per 100 million miles of travel. And what we found was that on rural non-interstate roads, that the rate of traffic fatalities is significantly higher than all other roadways across the state. And so that's a challenge in rural Florida, to make sure that these roadways are as safe as possible. And we've seen from research that rural roadways can be made much safer with a variety of improvements, looking at things like making sure that lanes are wide enough, at making sure that shoulders are paved, taking care of significant curves, and also removing sharp edges along the sides of roadways. These are very cost-effective solutions, and they've been found to be very helpful in keeping everybody safer. The challenge in terms of continuing to modernize the system, one of them is going to be ongoing inflation. The Highway Construction Cost Index, which is provided annually by the Federal Highway Administration, shows that since the beginning of 2022, there's been a 47% increase in the cost of highway construction. And certainly that has been a challenge for the Florida Department of Transportation and other local transportation agencies as they attempt to make the rural system in Florida more reliable and safer. So I'm going to conclude there, just pointing out that the rural transportation system is really a vital component of the quality of life and the economic health of rural Florida, but really it impacts residents throughout the state. So with that, I'm going to call on Colton to provide some comments.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Rocky, and I really appreciate Tripp for releasing this report. You know, the findings and recommendations in this report align with our Florida Chamber Foundation's research and the work it's being done by our Florida Chamber of Commerce's Infrastructure Coalition initiative, which I lead. Our Infrastructure Coalition unites businesses to ensure Florida's infrastructure is ready for the 2.5 million more Floridians we expect to call Florida home by the year 2030 and the 2.1 million more drivers we expect on our roads. And in 2018, the Florida Chamber of Commerce invested in creating our Florida 2030 Blueprint, which includes 39 goals and strategies to grow Florida into a top 10 global economy by the year 2030. And one of those goals is double the rural share of GDP in rural counties by 2030. Today, Florida's 31 rural counties represent about 2.92% of the Florida state's economy, with a goal of growing to 5.56 by the year 2030. And as emphasized in Tripp's report, achieving this goal requires focus on strengthening Florida's rural transportation network. Rural communities rely on efficient logistics systems to be connected to urban markets and national supply chains. Rural businesses, especially agriculture, manufacturing, and forestry, rely heavily on transportation networks to move products into the market effectively. Poor infrastructure can cause issues with efficiency and time to market, thereby increasing cost. And as the TRIP report notes, transportation is essential in rural areas to provide access to jobs, to facilitate the movement of goods and people, to access opportunities for healthcare and education, and to provide links to social and recreational activities. Expanding and modernizing transportation infrastructure is vital for rural economic growth. And since the launch of the Florida Chamber's 2030 Blueprint, rural counties have outpaced non-rural counties in GDP growth, 56.6% compared to 49.1% between 2018 and 2023, which is a 6.5% increase. And that growth is encouraging, but as this report emphasizes, without continued investment in transportation, it'll lead to congestion, safety concerns, and reduced connectivity between rural and urban communities. Ultimately, limited connectivity and outdated infrastructure can hold back not only rural regions, but Florida's entire economy. So I want to thank Trip again for releasing this timely report, and strengthening connectivity and investing in rural transportation is essential to meeting the Florida Chamber's 2030 Blueprint goal of doubling the rural share of state GDP and growing Florida into a top 10 global economy. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Rocky.
Thank you. I'll now ask Carolyn to explain how answer questions that you may have.
Sure. Thanks, Rocky, and thanks, Colton, for your remarks as well. I'm Carolyn Kelly. I'm the Director of Communication and Research for TRIP. So as Rocky noted earlier, we'll have an opportunity for Q&A to ask any questions about the findings of the report or some of the implications that Colton talked about. We'll be able to have you enter any questions you have either into the chat box that you see below, or you can use the raise hand function, and I'll be able to promote you to a panelist so that we'll be able to see you and hear you live, and you can ask your question as well as any follow-up questions. While we wait for some questions to come in, I'll note that the full report is now up on the TRIP website. You can find that at tripnet, tripnet.org. We've got the full report there as well as some infographics and news release there as well. So you can find the materials there. And throughout the day, if there are any other questions that you might have, you can contact Rocky or myself, and we can put you in touch with Colton or anybody else who might be able to answer your question. So I don't see any questions that have come in for the moment. So Rocky, if there's anything that you'd like to add, or Colton, feel free to go ahead.
Well, I just had a question from Colton listening to his comments. I'm curious, as the state is growing so quickly, and certainly that impacts where population shift and seeing population growth, and also in rural communities. I'm just curious how the rural economy is integrated with the urban economy. It feels like those lines are blurring a bit. So how does that impact the need for a reliable and efficient transportation system, throughout Florida, not just in the large urban areas?
No, I think you're right, Rocky. I mean, I think the infrastructure and the roads necessary to connect these urban and rural areas are essential to connect those two and form that gap. I mean, we're seeing more and more people that, are moving into our state, and we just want to make sure that we're prepared. Some people are going to move to cities, and a lot of people are going to move to rural communities. And then, a lot of these people in rural communities rely on jobs in urban areas, and they also want to work in their rural areas as well. But transportation and the infrastructure is necessary to achieve both of those.
Thanks, Cole.
Thanks, Colton. I see we've got a question from Eileen Kelly with WGCU. Eileen, I've just promoted you to a panelist. You'll be able to, Eileen, you can unmute your line and go ahead and ask your question. Eileen, I think we just need you to unmute your line, and then we'll be able to hear you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go right ahead.
Okay, the chat is disabled when I attempted to type in my question. No, so maybe that's why you didn't have some questions here. So how some of the struggles with getting these roads improved, is it because there's not maybe a whole lot of voices out there speaking for them because it is so rural and people would rather see it like in the urban areas where more people are going to their county commissioners and complaining about roads. Like, how do you, these are mostly state roads and local roads, right? Are they mostly local?
Yes. The roadways that we focused on, most of them are funded by the Florida Department of Transportation. So they are state highways, but the vast majority of them are 2-lane roads. And you're right, particularly, but we're seeing this across the country, but particularly in states like Florida with significant growth. The initial attention certainly is on the interstate system and the turnpike and some major highways. And so the states also try to maintain their rural roads as best they can. But increasingly what we're seeing is that a lot of travel starts to shift to the rural system. We're significant amount of freight. And so the states start to recognize that these, what they would consider secondary rural roads are becoming Main Street, are becoming critical routes throughout the state. And so now we're sensing a recognition by state transportation agencies that they also need to make significant improvements to some of these routes. So I think it's just a process of as they become increasingly critical to the state's economy and the quality of life in these communities, that they need to be modernized.
Because what I'm seeing is on these rural roads, they only seem to be getting widened if they are building excessive amount of housing. That's what I have been witnessing as coastal Southwest Florida is growing inland like dramatically. And I live on the other coast. And so I drive through these rural roads and drive all around there. But from what I'm seeing is that future plans for road widenings is hand in hand with the $1 million properties that are moving inland, where you're going to then have grocery stores and office buildings and all that. So, but are you like, isn't that a challenge, is to let's do it now for the agriculture, for the safety, for the trucks, for the people like myself that do drive from coast to coast, that not have to wait for growth? Or like, I'm just trying to understand the struggles here of why you're promoting this and what the big takeaway is. That yes, there's growing and you want it to be safer, but what are your stumbling blocks?
Sure. Transportation agencies are faced with a lack of adequate funding and also significant inflation, which unfortunately in the last 4 or 5 years has really taken a lot of their ability away from them because of these increasing costs. That said, as the public and the business community recognizes the need to modernize these highways, partly for reliability and to address congestion and to accommodate more freight travel, they're also recognizing that these systems have to be modernized to be a lot safer. But with their limited resources, they're having to essentially set priorities as they move forward with this. So certainly the challenge from the State Transportation Agency is, with the resources available, to determine which projects are the next set of priorities. So I don't know if Colton wants to add to that, but that's certainly, as a national group working with a bunch of states, that's the challenge we're seeing.
Yeah, I'd say that, this growth has occurred in a short time frame, and transportation projects also, they take time to roll out and build too. So there are a lot of factors, like you've mentioned, inflation and funding. I agree, Rocky.
And so with this report, what happens next? Do you give this to lobbyists, to get to Tallahassee, what do you do?
TRIP as an organization puts out reports when we see like a challenge or a need. And certainly here in Florida, and we did a similar report several years ago in Texas, where we saw these fast growing states starting to really have significant challenges on their rural system. It's not TRIP's role to then, to go to a legislative body as an organization. We're informational. But
okay, so it's our role to talk about the report. Okay,
Absolutely.
and that's fine. I just
Sure.
wanted to make sure
That's a
that
fair question. Yeah, yeah. And Trip, we're advocates for a reliable, safe transportation system, and so certainly we hope our report encourages the public, to reach out to their legislative bodies and really request solutions and that a priority is placed on making the transportation system as safe and reliable and well maintained as possible.
because that with my initial question, and these areas are there's so few people, and when you don't have that many voices clamoring, that kind of becomes an issue.
Absolutely. And
So-
so from our perspective, it starts with educating the public, and that's the role that we play.
Okay. Well, I look forward to reading this report deeper. I did way too quick this.
Yeah, no, we appreciate your interest.
Okay.
Yes.
I don't see that we have any other questions that have come in, but again, if there are some issues with the chat function, but you've still got a question, you can certainly reach out to myself or to Rocky throughout the day, and we're happy to answer those questions or connect you with someone who can.
Excellent. I do appreciate it.
Yeah, and I want to again thank Colton for taking time out of his busy day to appear at our news conference, and thank everyone who attended the news conference, and hope you have a productive day. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it, everyone.